My name is Kam Redlawsk. I'm 40 years old. I was born in Daegu, Korea, and I was raised in Chesterfield, Michigan. I was born in 1979 and I was adopted in 1983. So when I was 4 years old, I came to the United States to meet my new family. I don't quite remember 4 years old when I first got here. I think I just remember it through stories from my parents and pictures. But my childhood was pretty good. I had 3 brothers. I had a pretty typical middle class upbringing, and I was very loved. But school was very difficult, so my earliest memories were difficulty like fitting in. Although at the time I didn't really know why I didn't fit in, because I didn't realize I wasn't white for the longest time. And it's kind of a common story here from adoptees. But in general, it was a good upbringing. You know, I enjoyed, you know, how I was brought up and everything. In school, it was unique because I did have a lot of friends, but at the same time, it was sort of, I was teased a lot. So I was more of a floater. I never really belonged to a group. It's kind of how I've been my whole life. But at the same time, I was kind of an easy target because I looked different. So of course, the typical pulling your eyes back and telling me to go back to my country and that I didn't belong here because I wasn't white. And then they would find out that I was adopted, and that was kind of confusing for them when they would see my parents and my brothers knowing that they were white. Kids would make fun of the way I spoke. When I was first born, I think within the first 3 months of my life, I was born with a cleft palate in Korea, and I also had measles and then chickenpox pretty much within the first 6 months of my life. So I had scars on my face from the scratching my chickenpox. And so kids would also, you know, make fun of me for that and call me things like crater face and just a lot of mean things that kids do. But it wasn't something that I realized later on, that I think throughout most of my childhood I felt pretty lonely. So it's kind of like a typical emotion, but at this time I didn't sense why. You know, being made fun of children was just, I think that's something that a lot of us go through in general. We're always trying to seek identity. Then there's an extra layer of that I'm adopted and I was in an all-white community. Don't think I remember seeing another Asian kid like me. So hence why when you're surrounded by one thing, you start thinking you're that thing until you realize later on that you're not. And so when I was a teenager, I realized I was not. So that was difficult, and you know, you go through identity issues and things like that. But you know, I'm a pretty resilient person, so I kind of just got through it, and I don't think it really scarred me in the way of making me like a harder person in a way. So I kind of came away with it unscathed in a lot of ways. I mean, it's definitely there. It still affects you, things like that, and even if you don't realize it, but it's just something that you just kind of have to move past. And I have in the 40 years of my life. It's just kind of been a part of me, and it's not something that I'm upset about that happened. It's kind of contributed to building the person I am today. I think in high school I did struggle a lot with identity and accepting myself in a lot of ways, but as soon as I graduated high school and I got into college, you realize how much bigger the world is. In that process also is when I had found out I was having physical issues that were kind of mysterious to everybody, and I had started going to the doctors to figure out what was wrong. And I think that whole process of having a physical disability that's kind of progressed into what it is today has also greatly contributed to being different and acceptance, because it's not just about being Korean and different, it's also about having a physical disability, which is also another very visual tell that every time you come into the room, you are different. So I've been different my whole life, and I think I've just gotten used to being different. And so through the process of this disease and disability that I have, it's allowed me to have acceptance in a lot of ways, because there's a lot of things in your life that you can't control. You can only go with it and help it form you into the person you're supposed to be. I went to a community college first in Michigan to save up for a 4-year college, and I ended up going to College for Creative Studies in Detroit for automotive design degree. So I studied car design and product design in college. I pretty much stayed in product design, but then when I came to California, I was working for Mattel, and I had found my first nonprofit that was dedicated to trying to create awareness and create treatment for my rare condition. So while I still do product design now, mostly freelancing, I more branched off into advocacy for disability and my rare disease. So that's kind of where my main focus is, more so on using my design and artistic talents for advocacy and spreading awareness and talking about stories. Okay. Yeah, I was pretty active my whole life. I played soccer for about 13 years, but towards about my sophomore year, I noticed there was just some kind of disconnect. Like I would look at a soccer ball and my mind would say kick and my body would not. So it was very frustrating time in high school figuring out what was going on. I just thought it was me. At the beginning of college, I decided to start going to see a neurologist because it was getting worse. I was developing a thing called foot drop, where my foot would drop and I would trip frequently. So it became a very long process of finding a diagnosis. And I think I had 5 different diagnoses. Eventually, Mayo Clinic diagnosed with HIBM, which is called hereditary inclusion body myopathy, which is now today called GNE myopathy. They renamed it. And so it's a very rare genetic muscle wasting disorder that at the time affected 1,000 people worldwide. I didn't realize until some years later, but it was like a direct genetic visual link towards my biological parents, because they were carriers of the disease and they passed it on to me. And because it's genetic, it's strange because I was perfectly physically fine all the years of my childhood, but for some reason it doesn't physically manifest until about 20s and 30s. But there's little tells, like things like I could never stand on my toes, which is a tell of a muscle wasting disorder, or things like that. I had little, peculiarities that would show up. When I discovered that what I had was very much a disease and not something that was just, maybe I was tired or feeling lazy, it was difficult because I had already dealt with 4 different diagnoses before that. So even still, by the 5th diagnosis, I wasn't quite sure that's what I had. So I think, in a way, there was some skepticism. I didn't know what was going on. And there has been no really one absolute moment of like really dealing with this. It's kind of unfolded itself over 20 years. Because I remember being in the basement of U of M Public Library, and I had received the diagnosis from Mayo Clinic over the phone. And so I was like, okay, what do I do with this diagnosis? It's the 5th one I've had. And I started researching about it. It said it was extremely rare, maybe 1,000 people worldwide. I would probably never meet another patient. I'd probably never see research being done. And I had a lot of doctors tell me to quit college and just live a less ambitious life. And so I was researching and reading this in the library on the computer screen. And you read things like words like the prognosis being quadriplegia and things like that, losing your upper arms and in general, all your muscle. But you don't really know what that means until it starts happening. So I went into a wheelchair about 2011, and I still had upper body function. I could raise my arms and all sorts of stuff. But now the disease is affecting my upper body. So I'm brought back to those moments of being in the library and reading the words. Because now you have real tangible experience to back those words up. So it's been more because of progressive, you're dealing with it over a long span of time. So there was really no one moment where it just really clicked with me, like this is what I have and this is the plan that I'm gonna, install to deal with it. It's really been an evolution process. Much like when I was dealing with identity issues as being a Korean adoptee. So it's just, you kind of come to it and understand it over time. And so that's been my experience with my diseases, just watching it over time and absorbing what that means. I think in the difficulty of dealing with a progressive condition is I happen to be a very passionate and curious person. So I use my passion for like art, traveling, meeting new people, hearing stories. I use all those things to like kind of fuel moving past the difficulty. And not that you ever really move past it, because it's always going to be a part of you, but there's also good things that I've gotten from it, like a significant amount of perspective and understanding. And it's who I am, and it's a process of dealing with that and accepting it. But it's also brought a lot of good And I think it's pushed me to live life even harder. I've done things that most people have never done. I've skydived, I've parasailed, I've scuba dived in the Great Barrier Reef. I've traveled a lot of countries. We've road tripped most of California. And I think what it's taught me is that it's not just with me, but I think for all of us, we only have a certain amount of time, and we tend to think that we have a lot of time. So I think for me, in a lot of ways, it's kind of been the thing on my heels, pushing me to do things and live big and not be like limited in the way that I think a lot of people are limited. Just like obviously my Korean adoptee experience, there were some really difficult times, and it wasn't until I was an adult that I realized it was loneliness that I had felt all those years. I didn't have words for those emotions. And it kind of transpired in a lot of ways with my experience with this disease too. There's a level of loneliness. And so it's kind of been like something that's evident in a lot of my life. And I think that's why I'm so sensitive to people's emotions and feeling lonely and stuff. Like I hate when people feel lonely, and I think that's why I share publicly, is because when we think we're the only people going through it, it's even more significant that we feel lonely. And so I think it's really important to share, and that's why I share my story, so other people realize they're not the only ones, and we're all struggling with something, but we can move past it and find something good in it and use it to develop who we are as people. I think I've always been a very deeply sentient person. Growing up, like I was very sensitive to people. And I think this experience has allowed me to even have more experience to back up those feelings. And I publicly share not just for people with disabilities, but also people who are not disabled, in terms of that I think a lot of us limit ourselves unnecessarily. And if I can get out there and do a lot of things that are terrifying and scary and put myself out there, I think a lot of us have that. People will come up to me and say, oh, you're so brave and you're so courageous that you go out and do this. And I say, I think you have it within you too. I just don't think we realize we do. So I publicly share because I want to awaken the consciousness of people that there are people who are genuinely struggling and have, whether it's someone that is kind of chained to their body that is at odds against them, or somebody that has other things that we might not be able to visibly see, but they're struggling too, whether it's addiction or something like that. Is there are these things in us that we can overcome those and we can learn from them. And if we only had a lot more compassion and empathy for people, maybe we could understand the differences between us and not make, whether it's I'm Korean and you're Caucasian, or I'm disabled and you're not, we still have a lot of common ground. And so I think that's mainly why I share, is people realize those types of things, as well as how little time we have and how important it is to live your life and fulfill your passions and your dreams and things like that. That's what's so amazing about stories and like what Korean American Story is doing, is there is a limitation of what we're going to understand just based on our experiences. So you have to go out and seek the differences to be able to have empathy for those differences, because I wouldn't have known disability had I not had it. I viewed it in a lot of the same ways people did when I was a child and I would see someone disabled. Most people are not going to be able to experience that. It's not that they don't want to, and it's not that all ignorance is malice. It's that sometimes people just don't have the experience, and that's why I want to share publicly, because I want to offer that experience so people understand. And the more stories and varying stories we know, I think we just become better humans. We understand more. My name is Kam Redlawsk, and this is my Korean American story.